Min-jun was a man who made the streets of Seoul go silent. He was a dragon in a silk suit, a monster covered in ink that told the story of every soul he'd ever broken. But when he opened his bedroom door, his hand didn't go for his gun. It stayed frozen on the handle. There, sitting on his $10,000 silk rug, was a 3-year-old girl in a pink dress. She was happily chewing on a piece of fried chicken. Min-jun's security was impenetrable. His penthouse was a fortress, but someone had breached his inner sanctum. The girl looked up at the most dangerous man in the country. She didn't scream. She didn't run. Instead, she gestured to her plate and asked, "Are you hungry, big kitty?" Min-jun's heart stopped. But it wasn't because of the girl. It was because he realized she wasn't alone. And the secret she was about to accidentally reveal would turn his entire syndicate against him. Min-jun had two choices: eliminate the witness, or discover why his own men were praying he'd never open that door. That's when he noticed the second plate. Min-jun's world was built on cold steel and silence. Every morning at 5 a.m., he woke up alone. His bedroom was at the top of a glass tower. It was a fortress. He had spent millions to make sure no one could touch him. Thermal cameras watched the hallways. Lasers guarded the windows. Armed guards stood at every elevator. In his world, touch meant danger. A handshake was a test. A hug was an opening for a knife. Min-jun lived like a ghost in a museum. He was the dragon of Seoul. He was powerful. He was rich. But he was also a prisoner of his own fear. He stepped into his bathroom. The marble was freezing. He looked in the mirror and saw the tattoos covering his chest. The black ink of the dragon coiled around his ribs. Each scale represented a battle. Each claw represented a man he had broken to stay on top. He felt nothing as he looked at them. He put on his black blazer. No shirt, just the suit and the ink. It was his armor. He moved through his penthouse with practiced steps. Everything was in its place. His watch, his keys, his phone. But something was wrong. He smelled something. It wasn't the scent of expensive cologne or cleaning bleach. It was the smell of grease, fried food, and it was coming from his bedroom. Min-jun froze. How was that possible? His security system had not beeped once. The silent alarms were still dark. The guards downstairs hadn't radioed a warning. If someone was in his room, they were a ghost. Or worse, they were a professional sent to end his reign. His heart hammered against his ribs. His hand reached for the door handle. He pushed it open, ready to strike. He expected a hitman. He expected a gun pointed at his head. That's when he saw her. The little girl didn't even look up. She was sitting right in the middle of his gray carpet. She looked like a tiny pink flower in a desert of stone. She was holding a chicken wing like it was the most important thing in the world. She was small. She was messy. And she was sitting exactly where his most private secrets were kept. Min-jun stared at her curly hair and the bright pink headband. His mind raced. Who was she? How did she get past 3 layers of biometric locks? And why wasn't she afraid of him? The girl finally looked up. Her big brown eyes met his icy stare. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She just pointed at the second plate of food on the floor. It was sitting right next to her lace shoes. "This is for the big kitty," she whispered. Min-jun looked at the plate. Then he looked at his own tattoos. The dragon, everyone feared, was just a cat to her. But his surprise didn't last long. He heard a soft floorboard creak in the hallway behind him. What he didn't know was that he wasn't the only one watching the girl. Min-jun spun around, but the hallway was empty. The security cameras were still blinking green. Everything looked normal. But the girl's eyes suddenly went wide with fear. She wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking at the shadows right behind his head. Min-jun didn't move. He stared at the shadows behind him. The girl's eyes were filled with a cold, sharp terror. But as he stood in his $10,000 suit, the room around him began to fade. The smell of the expensive penthouse vanished. The sound of the city died away. Suddenly, he wasn't a mafia boss anymore. He was 8 years old again. He was standing in a kitchen that smelled of old bleach and burnt rice. He was wearing shoes with holes in the soles. His mother was on her knees in front of a man in a white suit. She was scrubbing the floor until her fingers bled. The man in the white suit was rich. He was powerful. And he was angry. "You missed a spot," the man hissed. He kicked a bucket of dirty water over his mother's head. Min-jun ran forward to help her. He was just a boy. He was small. He was weak. But he wasn't fast enough. The rich man grabbed a heavy glass vase from the table. He didn't look at the boy. He just threw it. The glass shattered against Min-jun's chest. A long, jagged shard sliced deep into his skin. He didn't cry out. He just watched his mother's face turn white with horror. "Don't look at him, Min-jun," she screamed. She pulled him into a corner. She used her wet apron to stop the bleeding. The rich man just laughed and walked away. He didn't care about the boy. He didn't care about the scar. To him, they were just trash to be thrown away. That night, Min-jun sat in their tiny basement room. He looked at the red mark on his chest. It was ugly. It was a sign of his shame. It was a reminder that he was a victim. That's when he made a promise to himself. He would never be a victim again. He would cover that scar. He would hide the boy who bled on the kitchen floor. Years later, he found an old man in a dark alley. The man had a needle and black ink. "Make it a dragon," Min-jun said. "Make it big enough to swallow the world." The needle hurt. The ink burned. But it didn't hurt as much as that glass vase. Every scale on the dragon's body was a layer of armor. He built a wall of ink around his heart. He became the monster so the monsters would fear him. He forgot what it felt like to be human. He forgot what it felt like to be loved. What he didn't know was that the wall was about to crumble. The memory snapped like a dry twig. Min-jun was back in his bedroom. The little girl in the pink dress was still staring at the shadows. She was trembling. Her little hand reached out and touched his tattooed leg. She wasn't scared of the dragon. She was scared of what was standing in the doorway. Min-jun felt a strange heat in his chest. It was right where the old scar used to be. He turned his head slowly. He didn't see a hitman. He didn't see a ghost. He saw a woman in a maid's uniform standing in the darkness. Her eyes were red from crying. She looked exactly like his mother did 30 years ago. But she wasn't alone. Two of Min-jun's own guards were standing right behind her. They had their hands on her shoulders. And they weren't protecting her. They were holding her like a prisoner. The tallest guard looked at Min-jun and smiled a greasy smile. "Boss," the guard said, "we found the person who broke your rules." Min-jun stood as still as a statue. The two guards gripped the woman's arms. The woman was Sarah, the new maid. She was shaking so hard her shoes tapped against the floor. Her eyes darted to the little girl on the rug. "Lili," she gasped. She tried to run to her daughter, but the guards yanked her back. Min-jun looked at the guard named Sang-ho. Sang-ho was smiling. He looked like he had just won a prize. "She let the kid run loose, boss," Sang-ho said. "She broke the golden rule. No family in the tower." Min-jun didn't smile back. His eyes were like chips of ice. "Why is she here so late?" Min-jun asked. His voice was a low growl. Sarah looked up, her face wet with tears. "I had to work," she whispered. "I've been here for 18 hours. Min-jun's brow furrowed. He paid his staff more than anyone in Seoul. No one needed to work 18 hours. But then Sarah said something that changed everything. "I have to pay them back," she sobbed. "The safety tax. Every month." Min-jun felt a cold spike of rage hit his gut. "What tax?" he asked. Sarah looked at Sang-ho and turned pale. She went silent. She was more afraid of the guard than the Mafia boss. That's when Min-jun realized the truth. His house was not a fortress. It was a playground for bullies. The men he paid to protect him were stealing from a mother. They were taking her money and making her work until she dropped. They were using his name to hurt the weak. It was the same thing the man in the white suit did years ago. Min-jun stepped toward the guards. Sang-ho's smile began to fade. He realized the boss wasn't angry at the maid. He was looking at Sang-ho like he was a piece of trash. "Is this true?" Min-jun asked. Sang-ho stepped back, his hand moving toward his belt. "She's lying, boss. She's just a clumsy maid." Min-jun didn't look at the guard's gun. He looked at Sarah's hands. They were red and raw from scrubbing. She was working herself to death to feed the girl in the pink dress. and his own men were the ones holding the whip. The threat wasn't a hitman from another gang. The poison was already inside his walls. "Let her go," Min-jun said. The words were quiet, but they cut like a knife. The guards hesitated. They had never seen Min-jun side with a servant. It was a shift they didn't understand. The air in the room felt heavy. It felt like the moment before a lightning strike. What he didn't know was how deep this rot went. Sang-ho let go of Sarah's arm. But he didn't look sorry. He looked at the other guard and gave a tiny nod. It was a signal. Min-jun saw it, but he didn't move. He watched Sarah scramble across the floor to grab Lili. The mother and daughter held each other in the corner. Min-jun turned his back on the guards. It was a dangerous move. He walked over to his desk and opened a small black book. It was his private ledger of every dollar that moved in the tower. He flipped the pages, his eyes scanning the numbers. He stopped on a page that didn't make sense. His hands began to shake with anger. "Sang-ho," Min-jun said without turning around. "Where is the rest of the payroll for March?" There was a long silence. Then he heard the unmistakable click of a gun being cocked. "The payroll is in good hands, boss," Sang-ho said. "But I don't think you're the one in charge anymore." The sound of the gun cocking was loud in the quiet room. Min-jun didn't flinch. He didn't even look up from the black book. He knew Sang-ho wouldn't fire yet. Sang-ho was a coward. He was a dog who barked but waited for his master's signal. And his master wasn't in the room. Min-jun stared at the numbers in the ledger. Large sums of money were missing. Millions of dollars had been moved to a hidden account. It wasn't just a safety tax on the maids. It was a massive theft from the entire syndicate. But there was one name at the bottom of every transfer. Dae-ho. Dae-ho was Min-jun's right-hand man. They had grown up together in the streets. They had bled together. Min-jun had trusted him with his life. He had given Dae-ho the keys to the kingdom. And Dae-ho had used those keys to unlock the vault and bleed it dry. "Is Dae-ho outside?" Min-jun asked. His voice was as calm as deep water. Sang-ho's hand shook slightly as he held the pistol. "He's where he needs to be," Sang-ho muttered. "He's making sure the rest of the men know who the real boss is." Min-jun finally closed the book. The thud sounded like a coffin lid shutting. That's when Min-jun looked at the girl. Lili was still holding her mother's hand. She was watching the gun with curious eyes. She didn't know what death looked like. She just knew the big kitty was in trouble. Sarah was weeping silently, trying to shield her daughter's body. Min-jun felt a cold fire ignite behind his ribs. He wasn't a king ruling over loyal soldiers. He was a man sitting on a throne of vipers. If he fought now, the room would become a slaughterhouse. A bullet could miss. It could hit the mother. It could hit the girl. Min-jun had spent his life being a monster. But he wouldn't let these vipers touch the only innocent thing left in his world. "Lower the gun, Sang-ho," Min-jun said. "If you kill me now, you'll never get the password to the offshore accounts." It was a lie. There were no passwords. But Sang-ho was greedy. His eyes flickered with doubt. "Dae-ho said we don't need you," the guard hissed. "Dae-ho is a fool," Min-jun replied. What he didn't know was that Dae-ho was already listening. A small speaker on the wall crackled to life. "I heard that, old friend," a voice boomed. It was Dae-ho. His voice sounded cold and distant. "You've gone soft, Min-jun. You're sitting on the floor with children. You're a disgrace to the dragon on your skin." Min-jun stood up slowly. He towered over the guards. He looked directly into the security camera lens. "Come and tell me that to my face, Dae-ho." The speaker went silent. The tension in the room was so thick it was hard to breathe. Was he going to strike back now? Or was he waiting for a better moment? Sang-ho lowered the gun just an inch. That was the mistake. Min-jun didn't move toward the guard. Instead, he reached out and took the half-eaten plate of chicken from the floor. He sat back down next to the girl. He took a bite. The guard stared at him like he had lost his mind. But Min-jun wasn't crazy. He was letting them think he had surrendered. He was letting them feel powerful. Because while they were watching him eat, he was counting. He was counting the seconds until his secret backup arrived. Then, a heavy red light began to flash on his desk. The tower's main power grid had just been cut. The room plunged into total darkness. The darkness was thick. The red backup light on the desk pulsed like a dying heart. In the shadows, the two guards were panicking. They couldn't see their own hands. They couldn't see the boss. "Don't move," Sang-ho screamed into the blackness. "I'll shoot. I swear I'll shoot." But the only sound was the soft chewing of a child. Min-jun sat perfectly still. His eyes had trained for years to hunt in the dark. He didn't reach for a blade. He didn't lung at the guard's throat. Instead, he reached out his hand. He found Lili's small, warm shoulder. He pulled her and Sarah closer to him. "Stay low," he whispered. That's when the room changed. The guards stumbled over the furniture. They were blind and terrified. They scrambled out of the room to find a flashlight. The heavy bedroom door slammed shut. The locks clicked. The Vipers had fled to find their leader, Dae-ho. For the first time in 20 years, Min-jun was alone with someone who didn't want his blood. The silence was heavy. Min-jun looked at the plate in his hand. He took another bite of the cold fried chicken. It wasn't seasoned with expensive salt or truffle oil. It tasted like garlic and ginger. It tasted like the small kitchen from his childhood. It was the first real meal he had eaten since his mother died. "Is it good, big kitty?" Lili asked. Her voice was tiny in the dark. Min-jun swallowed the lump in his throat. It wasn't the food. It was a feeling he had buried under a mountain of ink. "Yes," he said. "It is very good." Sarah was shivering next to him. "They are going to kill us, aren't they?" she whispered. Min-jun looked at his tattooed hands. He had used them to build an empire of fear. He had used them to take whatever he wanted. But could he use them to save something innocent? He realized he didn't want to be the dragon anymore. He didn't want to sit on a throne made of stolen money. He wanted to be the man his mother thought he would become. "Nobody is going to hurt you," Min-jun promised. He meant it. His heart, once frozen like a winter lake, was starting to thaw. He felt a strange warmth spreading through his chest. It was more powerful than any weapon he owned. He wasn't protecting a maid. He was protecting his own soul. What he didn't know was that his backup wasn't coming. He checked his watch. The red light on the face was dead. The signal jammer Dae-ho installed was stronger than he thought. He was truly trapped. No guards were coming to save the boss. He had no gun. He had no power. He only had a half-eaten plate of chicken and a scared mother and child. He heard boots marching in the hallway. Heavy boots. Many of them. Dae-ho wasn't waiting for the morning. He was coming to finish the job now. Min-jun stood up and walked to the window. He looked down at the city lights far below. Then, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A red laser that appeared on the glass. It danced across the room. It searched through the dark until it landed right on Lili's pink headband. The girl giggled, thinking it was a toy. "Look! A red ladybug," she cheered. Min-jun dove across the floor. He tackled them both just as the glass exploded into 1,000 stinging pieces. The sound of shattering glass filled the room. Min-jun hit the floor hard. He pulled Sarah and Lili under his heavy oak desk. "Don't move," he hissed. His heart was thumping like a drum. The red laser light vanished from the floor. But the danger was just getting started. The bedroom door didn't just open. It was kicked off its hinges. The heavy wood slammed against the wall with a bang. The lights in the hallway flooded the room. Min-jun looked out from under the desk. 4 sets of black boots marched inside. The boots stopped right in front of the silk rug. "Is this the mighty dragon?" a voice laughed. It was Dae-ho. He stepped forward, spinning a silver pistol on his finger. He looked down at the empty plate of chicken on the floor. He looked at the spilled rice and the pink headband. "You're hiding under a desk with a maid," Dae-ho mocked. "I expected a fight, Min-jun. Not a picnic." Min-jun felt the hot sting of glass in his shoulder. He didn't care about the pain. He only cared about the little girl trembling against his chest. Lili was quiet now. She was too scared to even cry. But Min-jun was done hiding. He crawled out from under the desk. He stood up slowly, tall and straight. He didn't have a gun. He didn't have his guards. He just had the ink on his skin and the fire in his eyes. The 3 gunmen pointed their rifles at his heart. The red dots returned, dancing on his bare chest. "You're making a mistake, Dae-ho," Min-jun said. His voice was steady. It was the voice of a man who had already died once. Daeho laughed and stepped closer. He pressed the cold barrel of his pistol against Min-jun's forehead. "The only mistake was letting you lead us for so long," Daeho said. "You're weak. You care about a child's dinner." That's when the shift happened. Min-jun didn't flinch. He didn't blink. "I don't care about the dinner," Min-jun whispered. "I care about the person who cooked it." He looked at the gunman behind Daeho. "Are you sure you want to follow this man?" Min-jun asked them. "He steals from mothers. He shoots at children." The guards shifted their feet. They looked at each other. Daeho's face turned bright red. "Shut up," he roared. He pulled back the hammer on his gun. The click sounded like a thunderclap in the small room. Everyone held their breath. Was this the end of the legend? Was the dragon going to fall in his own bedroom? What he didn't know was that Min-jun had one last trick. Min-jun reached into his back pocket. He didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a small black remote. It was the manual override for the tower's fire system. "If I press this, the room fills with gas," Min-jun said. "We all go to sleep. But only I know the way out." Daeho hesitated. His finger tightened on the trigger. The tension was about to snap. But then, a loud scream came from under the desk. It wasn't a scream of fear. It was Lili. She had crawled out and was biting Daeho's ankle with all her might. Daeho yelped and stumbled back. That was the opening Min-jun needed. He lunged forward, but he didn't go for the gun. He went for the throat. Min-jun moved like a shadow. He didn't wait for Daeho to recover from the child's bite. He slammed his palm into Daeho's chest. The air left the traitor's lungs in a loud wheeze. The silver pistol clattered to the floor. One of the gunmen raised his rifle to fire. But Min-jun didn't look at the gun. "Check your phones," Min-jun said. His voice was quiet. It was the sound of a blade sliding out of a sheath. The guards hesitated. Why was he so calm? Was he crazy, or did he have a secret? One guard reached into his pocket and pulled out his device. The man's face went white. "It's gone," the guard whispered. "My account is empty. Everything is gone." Min-jun stepped over Daeho's gasping body. "I own the bank," Min-jun said. "I own the streets. And I own the air you breathe." He looked at the three men. "Daeho promised you a kingdom, but he only gave you a grave." That's when the fight truly began. The first guard panicked and lunged forward. Min-jun didn't use a weapon. He used his hands. He was a whirlwind of black ink and precise strikes. He hit a nerve in the man's arm, and the rifle dropped. He spun and kicked the second man into the marble wall. It was cold. It was fast. It was terrifyingly efficient. But as he fought, a dark feeling rose in his chest. The old Min-jun wanted to snap their necks. The old dragon wanted to see blood on the silk rug. He felt the monster clawing at his throat. Could he finish this without becoming the man he hated? He looked back at the desk. Lili's wide eyes were watching him from the shadows. Min-jun stopped. He didn't deliver the final blow. Instead, he grabbed the third guard by the collar. He dragged him to the broken window. "Get out," Min-jun hissed. "Leave the city. If I see your faces again, the ink on my skin will be the last thing you see." The men didn't wait. They scrambled out of the room like rats from a fire. Daeho was still on the floor, clutching his chest. He looked up at Min-jun with pure hate. "You've lost your mind," Daeho spat. "You let them walk away. You're finished." Min-jun didn't hit him. He didn't even look angry anymore. He looked tired. The Mafia boss persona was cracking like old glass. "I'm not finished," Min-jun said. "I'm just starting over." He picked up the silver pistol and emptied the bullets onto the floor. He tossed the empty gun to Daeho. "Take it and go. You have nothing left." Daeho stared at the empty weapon. He realized he was truly alone. The power had shifted, but not with blood. What he didn't know was that Sarah was no longer hiding. Min-jun turned toward the desk to find the mother and child. But Sarah was standing up. She wasn't holding Lili. She was holding something else she had found in the desk drawer. It was a heavy, old-fashioned key. Her face was pale, and she was pointing it at a hidden door in the wall. "Min-jun," she whispered. "There's someone else in the house." A heavy thud came from behind the secret door. Someone was trying to get out. The thud behind the secret door echoed like a heartbeat. Min-jun didn't reach for a gun. He took the heavy key from Sarah's trembling hand. He turned it in the lock. The door swung open to reveal a young man tied to a chair. It was the head of his security. Daeho hadn't just stolen money. He had kidnapped the only men who were still loyal to the dragon. Min-jun cut the ropes. "Get everyone out," Min-jun ordered. "Every guard. Every soldier. Every man who carries a weapon in this house." The young man gasped. "But boss, who will protect you?" Min-jun looked at his tattooed chest in the mirror. "The fear is gone," he said. "And so are the men who sell it." By sunrise, the tower was empty. The black SUVs were gone. The men in suits had vanished into the morning mist. Min-jun stood in the middle of his vast living room. It was quiet for the first time in years. But silence can be more terrifying than a war. Without his army, was he still a king? Or was he just a man in an expensive glass cage? Min-jun called a meeting of his business partners. They weren't gangsters. They were the people who ran his shipping ports and trucks. No more shadow taxes, Min-jun told them. No more protection money. The partners looked at each other. They were waiting for the catch. "From today, we are a logistics company," Min-jun declared. "We pay fair wages. We protect our workers." That's when he turned to Sarah. She was standing near the window, holding Lili. "I don't need a maid," Min-jun said. Sarah's heart sank. She thought she was being fired. She thought they were being kicked back to the streets. But Min-jun wasn't finished. "I need a house manager," he said. "I need someone I can trust to run this tower like a home, not a prison." He handed her a thick envelope. Inside was a legal document for a trust fund. It was for Lili. It was enough money for school, for a house, for a future. Sarah started to cry. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Min-jun looked at the big kitty, drawing on the floor. "Because a long time ago, no one protected me," he whispered. "And I'm tired of being the dragon who burns things." What he didn't know was that the streets were talking. The word was out. The dragon had gone soft. The rival gangs in Seoul were hearing the news. They heard he had fired his guards. They heard he was playing house with a maid and a child. In the world of shadows, a change of heart is seen as a target. Min-jun sat at his desk. He looked at his tattoos. He realized they weren't meant to be a weapon. They were a wall to keep people out. He started to wonder if he could ever truly be a normal man. Can a monster really change his spots? Or was he just waiting for the next disaster to strike? Suddenly, his private phone buzzed on the desk. It was an unknown number. He answered it, but there was no voice. Just the sound of someone breathing. Then, a familiar cold laugh came through the speaker. "You think it's that easy to quit?" the voice asked. "The city still belongs to the Vipers, Min-jun. And we're coming for the girl first." The morning sun was bright over the streets of Seoul. The air was fresh and cool. Min-jun stood in front of a mirror, but he wasn't looking for a weapon. He was checking his tie. He wore a long-sleeved white shirt and a gray suit. The fabric was thick and soft. It covered every inch of the black ink on his arms. It hid the dragon that used to make the world tremble. For the first time in his life, Min-jun didn't look dangerous. He looked like a father. He looked like a man who belonged in the light. But the shadows of his past were never far away. He glanced at the door, half expecting a hitman to burst through. He waited for the sound of tires screeching or guns cocking. Instead, he heard the sound of small feet running down the hall. Lili burst into the room. She wasn't wearing a pink dress today. She was wearing a crisp school uniform. She had a bright yellow backpack shaped like a lion. "Are you ready, big kitty?" she shouted. Min-jun smiled, and it didn't feel like a mask. It felt real. "I'm ready," he said. They walked out of the tower together. There were no black SUVs waiting. There were no men with earpieces guarding the sidewalk. Min-jun held Lili's small hand in his. He felt the pulse of her life against his palm. That's when he realized the greatest lesson of all. True power wasn't about how many people feared his name. It was about how safe this little girl felt in his shadow. They reached the gates of the primary school. Other parents were chatting and laughing. They didn't pull their children away from him. They didn't lower their heads in fear. Min-jun was just another man in the crowd. He was invisible, and he loved it. He was no longer the dragon of the underworld. He was just Min-jun. Lili stopped at the entrance and looked up at him. She reached into her yellow backpack. "I made this for you," she said. She handed him a folded piece of paper. Min-jun opened it with shaking fingers. It was a drawing of a giant cat wearing a golden crown. Under the cat, she had written one word: hero. Min-jun felt a tear prick his eye. He tucked the paper into his pocket, right over his heart. "Go on," he whispered. "Don't be late." Lili waved one last time and ran into the building. Min-jun watched her until she disappeared inside. He turned to walk away, feeling a peace he had never known. He felt like the war was finally over. But then, a black car pulled up slowly to the curb. The window rolled down just an inch. Min-jun didn't reach for a gun. He didn't have one anymore. He just stood his ground as a man stepped out of the car. It was an old rival, someone who had waited years for this moment. The man looked at the school, then back at Min-jun. "You look different without your teeth, dragon," the man sneered. Min-jun adjusted his cuffs, hiding the ink once more. "The dragon didn't die," Min-jun said quietly. "He just finally found something worth guarding." The rival stepped closer, his hand hidden in his jacket. Min-jun saw the movement, but he didn't blink. He wasn't afraid for himself. He was ready to do whatever it took to keep that school gate closed. The man leaned in and whispered into Min-jun's ear. "We aren't here for the business, Min-jun. We're here because you forgot one very important person from your past." Min-jun's blood turned to ice as the man held up a photo. It wasn't a photo of Lili or Sarah. It was a photo of a woman who was supposed to be dead for 30 years.